Welcome to the Night Club, guys. It's your host, the Night Wrencher. Today I'm going to be showing you guys how to install your new vintage USA gauges on a 1972 to 80 Dodge truck. In a previous video, I showed you guys how to trim your stock insert so that way you can install these aftermarket gauges. That tutorial works for both these gauges as well as most other aftermarket gauges. I also showed you guys how to do it with the older style insert, the one with the smaller bezel. And if you guys want to check that out, I'll leave a link in the description. So the kit that I have on my truck and the kit that I'm going to be showing you guys how to install, those are two different kits. This one actually comes with a tack, but the only way you can install a tack on this truck is if you block off right here, which I did for the No Name National, so I can install the tack as well as my boost gauge. And then I have my wideband up here. So that's the only way you're going to be able to install a tack. If you want to keep yours somewhat original, then you're going to have to get the kit that comes with the speedo and then these 4 gauges over here on the left. I didn't realize that from the time that I got the gauges till now, the New Vintage USA website actually got updated and they have ready to go kits for these trucks. So as you can see, it's a 72 to 80 Dodge truck. It comes with the speedo, it comes with the oil, volts, fuel, and water, just like mine does. But if you guys look at the bottom of this gauge, it actually has a small tack. So you don't actually have to cut into your dash. It actually has a whole thing built right in. And as you guys can see, if I click on the bottom picture, it comes with all the adapters, so it's ready to go. And as far as I know, the fuel gauge is already set up, so it'll work with your factory fuel sender, so you're all good there. The kit that I'm talking about in this video is actually this 5 gauge kit. It's more of a traditional kit, and this one has the same volts, water, fuel, and oil, but it does not have the tack in the middle. So if you guys are interested in having that tachometer right there without cutting up your dash, definitely look into this kit. I'm going to leave a link to this down in the description down below. The only difference between this one and the other one is that you're going to have to add another wire, but I can definitely show you guys how to do that in another video. This isn't the only kit that you guys can get. If you guys scroll down, you guys can see you can get them in the standard performance white, in the 1967 series, in the 1940 series. The only difference is that they are a different style, but I do recommend that you guys go ahead and check out this website. There's a ton of stuff on here, and if you guys want something custom, you want to mix and match gauges, send them an email, let them know what you want, and they'll get you set up. In the short time that I was dealing with them, I had 0 issues. They were really awesome to work with. So let's go ahead and get back into this video. So when you first turn on the gauges, they have a feature that when you turn the ignition on, the needles will sweep. And what this does, it'll actually check the stepper motors. If there are any problems with the stepper motors, you guys are going to be able to find that out right away. This will also double check that everything is wired properly. After the initial sweep, the gauges will then set up to where they're supposed to be. You see I have about 10 volts going to the cluster right now. I have a full tank of gas, I have a cold engine, and I have oil. So if I turn the truck on, oil pressure just went up to 60 psi, battery volts went up to 13, engine is still cold, and my RPMs are right at 1500 RPMs, and everything is good to go. You guys can't really tell, but I have the lights on right now, and the backlight of the dash is a nice blue color. I'll put a picture of that up on the screen so you guys can see what it looks like when the lights are on. During the daytime though, you can't really see it. Alright, so I've already done the legwork for you guys. I've got 2 sets of gauges right here. I've got one from a 1975, which is this one. Then I've got one from a 1973, which is this one right here. The faces are a little bit different, but the general operation is about the same. There are a few differences, but for what we're trying to do, it doesn't actually matter. There's a lot going on these gauges, but where we're going to focus on is actually right here in the middle. You see these 9 little prongs, maybe 10 little prongs that are on the back of these gauges. That's going to be the connector that comes out of your harness. We're going to be going ahead and looking at that, and that's what I have outlined here. So first we're going to go ahead and orientate ourselves. So we're going to go ahead and draw this circle, and I'm going to add a X on the top left side. This X represents a missing prong that we have here on the back of the gauges, and that's what we're going to be using to orientate ourselves in case you guys are looking at the connector. This back of the gauge also has a little pin in the middle that kind of looks like a keyway. That's going to tell us where the up position is, and we're going to go ahead and mark a little circle there, and that'll tell us that it's the top pin. Instead of going all the way around, we're going to go by most important and then work our way down. So the most important one is actually going to be pin 3, and pin 3 is going to be our 12-volt feed. So if we're looking at the back of the connector clockwise, we're going to be looking at the third pin. That's going to be your 12-volt feed. This wire actually comes from a fuse that goes all the way back to your fuse panel inside your glove box. So if we look at the NVU manual that comes with your gauges, you're going to see that there is a red wire listed. Function, it says 12 volts and switched ignition. So that's going to be your pin number 3 when you're looking at the back of the connector clockwise. What this is going to do is that it's actually going to power your entire gauge cluster, everything from the stepper motors, all the gauge needles, everything is going to be wired off of this single wire. In addition to the power wire, you're also going to need a ground wire. So if we look at pin number 4, that's going to be your ground wire. So if we look back at the NVU manual, you're going to see pin 7, color black, function is going to be ground, and that goes straight to ground. So that's easy. Now we've got power and ground established. You guys need to remember that since we don't have an ammeter, we have a voltmeter now. Your voltmeter is actually going to run off whatever your 12-volt signal is. So if you've got a clean signal coming from your fuse block, you're going to get a clean signal coming from your voltmeter. No other wiring has to be done for the voltmeter. Now that we've got power and ground established for the main gauges, now we're going to look at the backlight. So the backlight's going to be the color of the back of the gauges. So in my case, it's blue, but depending on the style of gauges that you guys use, it could be a white, it could be a yellow, it could be a red. But for my purpose, it's going to be a blue. That's actually going to be the top pin. So pin number 1, that's going to be your regular gauges. So to get the backlight on your gauges to work, we're going to go ahead and go to pin 6. That's going to be a white wire, and that's going to be the function of lighting. So this wire actually comes off of your headlight switch. As soon as you guys turn your lights on, it's going to send power to these gauges. Once the gauges see power to this pin, the back of the gauges are going to light up. Since you already have ground, power and ground will illuminate the gauges, and you're all good there. Next, we're going to go ahead and set up the turn signals, and that's going to be pin 10. And it's also going to be pin 8. Looking at pin 9, the way that I see it on these gauges, it doesn't actually do anything, so we're going to go ahead and ignore that pin. So we're looking at pin 10 and pin 8. Pin 10 is coming from your left turn signal. Pin 8 is coming from your right turn signal. Going back to your manual, for the left turn signal, we're looking at the blue wire, and for the right turn signal, we're looking at the gray wire. Now we're going to work on the individual gauges themselves. As you guys know, NVU is kind of set up into a system. You can buy the gauges individually, but when you buy them as a kit, it comes as a system, so you don't have to wire the gauges individually. You just wire them off of the main connector off the back of the harness. So the wiring that comes off of the main connector is actually really easy. We're going to go clockwise, and the first one that comes up is the fuel sender. So this is going to be a negative wire. What I mean by that is that the wire that comes from here is a positive wire that goes toward your sender. Your sender then has a variable resistor or resistance inside, and then it grounds itself out. You guys are going to notice that a lot of the old school fuel senders are one wire, and that's because you have positive power going to the sender, and the sender actually grounds that. Whatever voltage is left over when it goes to ground, that's what the gauge is going to see, and that's what your gauge is going to show. If this fuel sender is shorted directly to ground, it's probably going to read a full tank, and that's typically a safety feature, because if, let's say, you have a harness running to your tank or lights or whatever, and it gets shorted, it like gets pinched on the frame, you don't want your gauges to blow up. So instead of that, the gauges will read full or read maximum hot, and the gauge itself will use up the majority of the voltage, and whatever gets shorted to ground will just get shorted to ground. There won't be any kind of permanent damage to the gauges themselves, so we're all good there. Again, if we look at the manual, we go pin 11, color green. That's going to be your fuel. So you're going to go ahead and hook up your green wire to your fuel sender wire. The next one is oil pressure, and that works exactly the same as a fuel sender. It's a single wire. The oil pressure sensor actually comes with the kit, and so you're just going to find a good location for it that'll match the threads, or maybe use one of the adapters that come included, and you're going to go ahead and install that on the engine, install the oil pressure sensor. That's already calibrated to whatever the gauge is calibrated, so you literally just install the sensor, you clip the connector if it doesn't match your stock connector. If it does match your stock connector, then you're just going to go ahead and plug that into the oil pressure. Should be a single wire, just like your fuel sender. That wire should come all the way back to the harness and come up to the connector. and that should be pin 5 when you're looking at the back of the connector, should be your oil pressure sensor. If you ground this out, just like I said before, it's probably going to read maximum pressure. So in case you go ahead and wire this up and you see maximum pressure, it's probably going to be a short to ground. If after the initial sweep the gauges don't move, they're probably going to be open, which means that they're not connected to anything. For the oil pressure wire, we're going to look at pin 4, color yellow, and that's going to be your oil pressure. We're going to skip the next pin and move on to the pin after that, and that's going to be your temperature. There should be a temperature sensor included with your kit, so as soon as you guys find a suitable place for it, maybe take off some of the stuff that goes on the intake or on the heads or on the water pump, find a suitable place for it, go ahead and install it using one of the adapters. If you don't have the proper adapter, I'm sure your local auto parts store has like a little assortment of different adapters you can use, but make sure you use the same sender that came with your gauge kit because they are calibrated together. If it goes out, you could probably contact MVU directly. They can figure out what kind of sensor that you're going to need. Maybe it's something you guys can buy off the shelf. Maybe it's something that can be provided to you. But if the senders come with the kit, make sure that you use them with these gauges. For temperature, we're going to look at pin 2, and that's either going to be a green, yellow, or a gray wire. I don't know what GR stands for, but if it's a dual color wire, that's going to be the one for your temp sensor. So the last pin we're going to look at is actually your brake light, and I'm not talking about the brake lights on the back of your car. This is an actual light that's on your set of gauges. So if you guys flip this over, look at the front, it says brake. As far as I've seen, the brake wire actually runs directly to your e-brake pedal, and it grounds out as soon as the pedal is engaged. This is like if your e-brake is on or you don't have any fluid pressure and you have a pressure sensor on the brake line itself, that's where this light would come on. Unfortunately, I couldn't find anything in the manual for the single big gauge and the 4 little gauges for you to wire in your brake light. If you guys get the speedo/tachometer where it comes 1-in-1, then it does come with like some extra slots so you can put that in. So for now, we're going to go ahead and skip that. If you guys are interested in running a separate brake light, you guys can go ahead and add one, and I can show you guys how to do that in a separate video. One question that I'm probably going to get is, how do the gauges know what fuel sender I'm running? What if I'm running a custom surge tank? What if I have a fuel cell? What if I have a stock gauge? How does the gauge know when it's full and when it's empty? So if you guys go look at your manual again, there is a page 26. On the big speedo, there's going to be a black plug. You take that plug off, and there's going to be a set of DIP switches, and depending on where you position those switches, it's going to change the resistance value of the fuel gauge. So if you guys look in your back of the manual, you guys are going to see a little chart. After you take the plug off of the DIP switches, you're going to be able to set them up to whatever sender you have inside the tank. Even if it's not stock Mopar, you can figure it out based on these settings. And if none of these settings work, I recommend calling NVU to set you guys up. Again, if your gauge just pegs out to max, you probably have a short somewhere, and you're going to need to take care of that before any of this works. If you know there's fuel in the tank and your gauge still reads empty, you either have an open circuit or the sender itself is bad or not connected. So you guys are going to need to do a little bit of troubleshooting in case it doesn't work right off the go. I'm showing you guys how to wire them up on a fully functioning vehicle. If your gauge didn't work before you guys wired this up, it might not work after you wire this up. But then again, the old gauges were wired kind of wonky, and maybe installing the new set of gauges will actually make everything work the way it's supposed to, but you won't actually know until the gauges are in and installed. Looking back at the manual, we've already done the 12-volt feed, the temp sensor, the oil pressure, the backlight, the ground, the right turn signal, left turn signal, and the fuel. There's a couple items left, and we're going to go through them one by one. So we're going to start at pin 12. That's going to be a brown wire. That's going to be a program button. So that button actually comes with the kit. You guys have to figure out where you guys are going to put it. Just drill a hole, put the little button in, and you're gonna get a brown wire that goes to that button. Then you're gonna need to take that button and actually route it back into your ground wire. So you guys can see right here in this diagram, you have the brown wire going to one side of the button. Orientation doesn't actually matter. And in fact, in the back of my gauges, both wires on the button were black. So you can wire them up to either one, and then the other side will go directly to ground. What it actually does is it actually intermittently shorts the gauge itself, and that'll change the display As long as they're wired up the way they're supposed to, you shouldn't have a problem. So one of the wires actually goes to the brown wire and the other wire actually goes straight to ground. The next wire we're going to look at is violet. It says that it is not in use, so you guys can go ahead and clip that short. Just leave about 2 inches or something in case you guys find a way to use it later. Pin 5 is a tan wire that is function high beam 12 volt positive. So what you're actually going to do there is that you're actually going to take a wire and you're going to splice into the high beam side of your light switch. It's also going to feed the 12 volt on your gauge, and that's going to turn the high beam light on. Is it absolutely necessary? Probably not. Is it necessary if you don't even have high beams on your truck? Probably not. Should you install high beams? Absolutely. And if you want to install this, great. And if not, no worries. Your stock gauges didn't have it either, so no harm, no foul there. And the last wire we're going to be looking at in the back of your gauges is pin number 3. That's going to be an orange wire, and that's going to be your speed signal wire. That speed sensor is going to get hooked into your transmission. One side is going to go directly to ground, and the other side is going to go back up toward your gauges and then plug into this orange wire right here. That pretty much covers the install of the NVU gauges. If you guys have any specific questions, go ahead and put them down below. I will try to answer them as best as I can, just like I do in all my videos. So I will see you guys all in the next one. Night Wrencher out.